The calm Sunday morning of December 7, 1941, would forever be etched in history. The United States Pacific Fleet lay anchored at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Sailors were still waking up. The sky was clear, and no one imagined that within minutes the world would change forever. At 7:55 a.m., the first wave of Japanese aircraft screamed down from the clouds. Torpedo bombers targeted battleships, dive bombers aimed at airfields, and fighter planes strafed soldiers who were still trying to understand what was happening. This surprise attack, planned by Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, was meant to cripple the American Navy long enough for Japan to conquer the Pacific. In just over 2 hours, the Japanese destroyed or damaged 8 U.S. battleships, wrecked 200 aircraft, and killed over 2,400 Americans. President Franklin D. Roosevelt would call it a date which will live in infamy. The United States, previously hesitant to enter another global war, now had no choice. The next day, America declared war on Japan, and World War II had fully reached the Pacific. Japan's leaders, however, believed they had won more than just a battle. They believed they had secured dominance over the Pacific Ocean. Over the following months, Japan swept across Southeast Asia and the Pacific, capturing the Philippines, Singapore, Hong Kong, the Dutch East Indies, and Guam. The rising sun flag flew over territory stretching thousands of miles. Japanese soldiers, pilots, and sailors felt unstoppable. Yet beneath this wave of victories, a quiet storm was forming. The United States, wounded but not broken, began to rebuild. Shipyards worked day and night, repairing damaged vessels and building new ones, especially aircraft carriers which had miraculously been absent from Pearl Harbor during the attack. These carriers, USS Enterprise, USS Hornet, and USS Yorktown, would become the core of America's counterstrike. Meanwhile, in the heart of the Pacific, a small group of U.S. Navy intelligence officers sat inside a secret code-breaking station called HIPO. Located in the basement of a building at Pearl Harbor and led by Commander Joseph Rochefort, these cryptanalysts worked tirelessly to break Japanese naval codes, specifically the JN-25 code. Their dark suits, cups of cold coffee, and sleepless eyes would soon become one of the most important reasons America would survive. By March 1942, Rochefort and his team began to notice repeated references in Japanese communications to a location called AF. What was AF? Intelligence suggested it might be Midway Atoll, a tiny U.S.-controlled island in the middle of the Pacific, just large enough for an airfield, a submarine base, and a few hundred Marines. If Japan captured Midway, it could threaten Hawaii and force the United States to surrender or negotiate. American commanders debated, but they needed proof. So they created a trap. They ordered the radio operators on Midway to send a fake message in plain English: "Our water supply system is broken." 2 days later, Japanese code messages reported that AF is short on water. That was it. Confirmation. AF was Midway. Japan was coming. At the same time, Admiral Yamamoto finalized his ambitious plan, Operation Me. His goal was simple: lure the remaining U.S. carriers into a trap, destroy them, and secure Japan's control of the Pacific. His fleet was enormous: 4 aircraft carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Huryu, plus battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and over 250 planes. He believed the Americans were weak, demoralized, and unaware. But he was wrong. Back in Hawaii, Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, the calm and calculated commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, made a decision that would change history. Instead of waiting to be attacked again, he would strike first. He ordered Task Force 16 and 17, led by Admirals Raymond Spruance and Frank Jack Fletcher, to sail toward Midway and wait in secret. The Americans would not be surprised this time. They would be ready. By late May 1942, the ocean between Midway and Japan became a silent battlefield of submarines, carriers, and airplanes, preparing for a clash no one could yet see. Pilots practiced dive bombing over the endless sea. Mechanics worked on aircraft engines in the humid island air. Soldiers dug trenches on the sand of Midway, surrounded by seabirds and crashing waves. The stage was set. Just 6 months after Pearl Harbor, America was no longer hiding behind damaged battleships. It was preparing to face the Japanese Navy head-on. Two nations, two fleets, two strategies, destined to collide at a tiny atoll in the middle of the ocean. And within a few days, the course of the entire Pacific War would be decided. Part II. The Clash of Carriers, June 4, 1942. The night of June 3, 1942, was quiet over the Pacific Ocean. Far to the northwest, the powerful Japanese First Air Fleet, the WWII, commanded by Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, moved silently across the sea. On board the aircraft carriers, pilots prepared for what they believed would be another easy victory. At 4:30 a.m. June 4th, Nagumo gave the order, "Launch the first wave." Moments later, the sky filled with the roar of aircraft engines. 108 Japanese planes took off, heading straight for Midway. At 5:20 a.m., a U.S. radar station on Midway detected the incoming aircraft. Alarms screamed across the island. The first attack began at 6:20 a.m. Japanese bombers descended from the clouds. Though the island shook from explosions, Midway's defenders refused to surrender. American Marine Corps pilots launched their slow, outdated aircraft, and ground crews manned anti-aircraft guns with relentless courage. At 7:00 a.m., the Japanese strike commander radioed Nagumo, "Runways damaged but still operational. A second attack is required." This message created a critical moment of decision for Admiral Nagumo. His reserve aircraft were armed with torpedoes, ready to strike any American ships that might appear. Now, he had a dilemma: rearm his planes with bombs to attack the island again, or keep the torpedoes loaded in case American carriers were near. Believing no American ships were nearby, Nagumo chose to rearm his planes for a second strike on Midway. This process was slow and dangerous, filling the hangar decks with fuel hoses, bomb carts, and armed aircraft. And while this was happening, something unexpected occurred. At 7:15 a.m., a Japanese scout plane spotted American naval forces. The message was delayed and unclear, but it reached Nagumo. "Enemy ships present, possibly carriers." Nagumo was shocked. His perfect plan, based on surprise, was falling apart. He immediately ordered his crews to change weapons again, from bombs back to torpedoes. A chaotic and risky decision that created a recipe for disaster on his crowded, volatile hangar decks. The Americans struck back sooner than expected. American planes from Midway launched uncoordinated, costly, but crucial counterstrikes. These attacks, though scoring no hits, kept the Japanese carriers off balance, ensuring their decks were never clear enough to launch a counterstrike. At 8:00 a.m., the first wave of Japanese planes returned from bombing Midway, running low on fuel and ammunition. Carriers rushed to recover them. Flight decks became crowded with damaged aircraft, spilled fuel, and armed ordnance. At that exact moment, unseen by the Japanese, the three American carriers were approaching from the northeast. The stage was set for the second phase, one that would decide the fate of the Pacific. And within the next hour, the hunters would become the hunted. Part III. 5 Minutes to Destiny. From the decks of USS Hornet, Torpedo Squadron 8 VT-8, led by Lieutenant Commander John C. Waldron, took off. 15 torpedo bombers, slow, outdated TBD devastators, headed straight toward the Japanese fleet. From the Enterprise and Yorktown, other torpedo squadrons followed. In total, 41 American torpedo bombers sped low over the ocean, flying into the most dangerous place imaginable. At 9:20 a.m., Waldron's VT-8 found the Japanese fleet. They attacked without fighter cover. Japanese Zero fighters pounced from above. One by one, the American planes were shot into the sea. All 15 aircraft were destroyed. Only one pilot, Ensign George Gay, survived, floating on his life raft, a sole witness. The other American torpedo squadrons that arrived moments later suffered the same fate. Of the 41 torpedo bombers sent, 35 were destroyed, and not a single torpedo hit a Japanese ship. It seemed like disaster, but their sacrifice was not in vain. The low-flying torpedo bombers forced the Japanese Zero fighters to descend to sea level, clearing the air high above. And at that exact moment, another group arrived from the clouds. From an altitude of 20,000 feet, American SBD Dauntless dive bombers from Enterprise and Yorktown, led by Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey, spotted the Japanese carriers. McCluskey had followed a lone Japanese destroyer racing back to the fleet, a decision that changed history. At 10:20 a.m., McCluskey's dive bombers reached the Japanese fleet. Below them was chaos. Carriers were turning in defensive circles, their flight decks and hangar bays crowded with fueled aircraft, stacks of bombs and torpedoes. Nagumo's fighters were busy down low, finishing off the torpedo planes. The sky above was empty. At 10:22 a.m., the dive bombers plunged toward the carriers at nearly 300 mph. Bombs hit the carrier Kaga, exploding among refueling aircraft. Another group hit Akagi, Nagumo's flagship, igniting fuel and munitions. A third group struck Soryu, turning the ship into a burning inferno. In just 5 minutes, 3 of Japan's 4 frontline carriers were fatally hit. Smoke filled the sky. The Imperial Navy, undefeated until now, was stunned. The tide of the war was turning. Part IV, the final blow in the aftermath. Only one carrier, Huryu, remained operational. Admiral Nagumo ordered her to launch every available aircraft in a desperate counterattack against the American carriers. The Japanese found the USS Yorktown and scored 3 direct hits with bombs, crippling the carrier. Minutes later, a second wave of torpedo bombers delivered the final blow, striking her side. The once proud Yorktown went dead in the water. Japanese pilots radioed back. Carrier sunk. Huryu's moment of triumph was brief. American reconnaissance aircraft spotted her position. From the decks of Enterprise and Hornet, squadrons of SBD Dauntless dive bombers took off for the final strike. Around 5:00 p.m., 4 bombs struck the Huryu. One tore through the flight deck and exploded in the hangar among fuel hoses and fully armed planes. Flames shot 50 meters into the air. Within minutes, Huryu was burning from bow to stern. Admiral Taman Yamaguchi, refusing to abandon his ship, ordered the crew to evacuate while he and his captain remained aboard. The ocean grew quiet again. On the morning of June 5th, the remaining Japanese carriers were scuttled. Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Huryu all slipped beneath the waves. On June 6th, a Japanese submarine slipped past American destroyers and fired torpedoes, sinking the destroyer USS Hammond and delivering the final, fatal blow to the USS Yorktown, which sank on June 7, 1942. In one day, Japan lost 4 fleet carriers, over 250 aircraft, and more than 3,000 men, many of them elite pilots and experienced crew who could never be replaced. Admiral Yamamoto, heartbroken, ordered his fleet to retreat. The Japanese command, fearing the psychological impact of the defeat, immediately initiated a strict cover-up. Details of the catastrophic losses were concealed not only from the public, but even from key government figures like Prime Minister Heike Tojo. Injured sailors were quarantined in hospitals with gag orders, and families of the dead were informed gradually over months, often with false information regarding the cause or location of death. This intense secrecy was meant to preserve the morale and image of the Imperial Navy, but it also kept Japanese military planning from truly facing the strategic reality of the shift in power. For the United States, the victory at Midway was the turning point of the Pacific War. Before Midway, Japan was on the offensive, expanding its territory at will. After Midway, the balance of power shifted. Japan's naval air power was crippled, and its expansion was halted. The United States, now confident and with its new carrier production capability rapidly exceeding Japan's, was ready to seize the initiative. The decision on where to strike next was made quickly: the Solomon Islands. Just 2 months later, in August 1942, U.S. Marines executed their first major amphibious landing of the war at Guadalcanal. The Guadalcanal campaign would become a brutal 6-month war of attrition, fought on land, at sea, and in the air. The American victory there, coupled with the crippling blow at Midway, permanently put Japan